not going to cover any parts of RPA basic things, but I'll start with what is an RPA life cycle and stuff like that. Okay. The other things I think we have already discussed much in the introduction. So I'm not going to go with the basic introduction of what is RPA and what are the use cases and stuff like that. I'm just going to start with the RPA life cycle. So what is the life cycle? The life cycle is going to be when you require to implement a particular bot as a process automation, right? So when I say a process automation, what could be fitting under a process automation is what we need to first understand, right? Not every project might fit under. It'll have its own reasons and it'll have its own feasibilities, that it may be developed into an automation project or it may not be into an automation project, right? So if you say, so that is what we have in, we discuss and we do all these things in our discovery phase. So when you get an idea of what you're going to do, or when you get an idea of your requirement, then we are going to go ahead and start with the requirement, understand the requirement, and go ahead with to see what is the feasibility of the solution that we can do it as a process automation. So most of the things that we are talking about is an existing process that is already in place, which is executed by humans, right? So we are going to make that only into a process automation. So it could be a business process, it could be just a part of the process, or it could be any kind of a detailed process, which is going to be like they might be a kind of process which might be linking between several systems or several domains, like not domains, several streams of your thing. So it could be linking with sales. It could be from there we might take it for the marketing, from there we might take it for another set of customer demand data. So all those things we might be doing into one single process, or you could follow the same process that is manually done, and we could do the automation. So who are the people involved here? We have the client or your subject matter expert, who will be your product owner, right? So that particular product owner or the process owner. So that particular person is going to talk about all the existing ways that they are doing this automation. Then you have, if the process owner is not available, then we might have a business analyst who is there. Okay, a business analyst who is more of a techno-functional role and who would go ahead and understand the requirement, and then transpose that particular requirement into a technical aspect to the technical team. And then we have an architect or whoever is your senior lead, right? So these three people will be the ones who will be discussing, where the architect or the technical people will be understanding the requirement and understanding the feasibility. So even before this, there's something called an opportunity assessment. If the requirement is not coming from the customer, then you're going to talk about an opportunity assessment, where you go and see if there is an opportunity for automation in any of the projects. But if the requirement is coming from the customer, then there is no an opportunity assessment, right? Right. So what happens in the feasibility? So what happens in your discovery state? So you see whether it is a feasible solution, whether a feasibility analysis will be done, whether the solution is feasible, what kind of automation are we going to do, whether it is an attended or an unattended automation, what is the complexity of the automation. We have a scale of high, very high, medium high, medium, then you have low, and low medium, something like that. I think there is one more thing which will be, this is pertaining to your company where you work. Okay, then we do a dependency as to what are the other dependent systems that we are going to touch base, or where the data will be going, or where we are going to send our output or send our input, receive our inputs and stuff like that. Then we have the usability analysis. Usability analysis is again a place where you understand what is the outcome of my process automation. How many people are going to use it, or how many hours am I going to save, or how we are going to talk about both tangible as well as intangible figures, right? So we talk all this in your, we understand all this. And once we feel, okay, this is a feasible solution that we can do it as a process automation, then we are going to create a process design document or a process definition document, which is a PDD, and you capture everything. So here we are going to capture everything in the form of, either you capture it in the form of functional wordings, or you capture it in the form of a process map, right? Then we get into the automate stage. So in the discovery phase itself, you'll have estimations and everything. So usually there will be a 30% or a 20%, because a process automation is something that we are working on an existing system. So there's always a chance that the existing system may not be completely in sync working with the tool that we are working, right? Whether it is UiPath or any other automation tool. So we always give, for any project, we always give a 20% buffer, so that we see all the scenarios are working or things like that. So the estimations will be calculated in that way, right? So the recommended is 10 to 15%. We depending on the companies and depending on whichever project you are, the complexity of the project you are, the buffer percentage increases. So all this is done, and then we are getting into the automate state, where we are actually going for the development, where the budget, the allocation of the resources, what is the tool, and then we have a solution document. All those things are going to be configured, and we are going to have something called a solution design document. Okay, so who is going to be involved? The actual this is the place where you're going to talk about a source management system or a source control system also, which means your product or your process is first time going to be created in a UiPath Studio. So who will create it? Your architect or your technical lead will be creating it in your SVN or in your GitHub or in your TFS, and then access will be given to you guys, or given to the developers. And then we'll start with the working, and who is going to work on what is the number of hours that we are working. These are all kind of the project manager will be tracking. But otherwise, as a developer, some people who are in a senior role, right, anybody who are in the senior developer roles will be able to track this information as well. And then once your development process starts, so you're going to always have a as is solution, which is the current human operated solution, and a to be proposed solution, which should be the process automation that we do it with a tool, right, with the bot. So you do all those things, and once your product is almost you've done with your individual files or individual team has been working. So then you come with your optimized state. Your optimized state is where you actually integrate your workflow. So when you integrate who is having a problem or which file is having input related issues, then you do a lot of debugs, then you do a lot of exception handling. All those things will be done, and finally you will have an integrated workflow, right? One single project. So every time in this automate state, if you're practicing an automate state of 2 months, you might be actually having a lot of time also available for the integrate workflow. Okay, so somebody will be integrating the code, and the basic operation of the source control system, where you do a check-in check-out every day, and your code is automatically updated into the source control system. And then we go into the optimized state, where you integrate the workflow. We do the unit testing, and that's when the quality team will be coming into the picture to create your test cases. And then we are going into our monitor state, where in our monitor state is where we are going to showcase our product to the customer or to the process owner. So this is when, along with the UAT, we capture all the users recommendations. There might be a lot of information that the user might be saying, no, this was not this as expected, or we wanted, you can do an add-on to this particular feature. So all those things will be coming. So if there is a new requirement, then we call it as a new scope, right? So we have it as a change management. So that comes into the picture, and the UAT keeps happening while the developer also creates all the, in case there are additional changes, then the developer will be additionally modifying their code to, withhold that particular changes. And then we are going to also have, in case you are having issues with the, in the testing, then you're going to talk about defect management. So the defects gets fixed, it goes back to the developer and the tester to and fro. Multiple rounds of testing will be done. And the most important state is your monitor state, where you're actually testing the product and you're showing it to the process owner, so that everything is ready and is visible into the hands of the process owner or your customer, right? And then once everything is done, we calculate a lot of metrics and we plan for the go live. So go live is going to be what is the number of issues that, or the number of efforts that we have planned. The metrics is going to be your effort variance, your schedule variance, and all the stuff that will be coming. What was the defect analysis we did, how many defects was it coming? So as per as per your company's thing, you might be agreed for a 10% discount, defects. So in case you have more number of defects, so what is the defects ratio? So all those things will be coming into the picture. Okay, so where are we in line with the basic figures that we actually have? So your company might be having a figure of say 10% of defects, but you might be touching in this particular project, if it touches to a 15% of defects, and you're going to talk about your project is not the right project. Okay, somewhere you have to correct a lot of steps so that for the next project we don't have a similar situation, right? We do a lot of metrics analysis, and they'll be reporting. Most of the metrics will go, in terms of efforts and everything might not go, but some metrics which in terms of defects and things like that might also go to the customer. It's not a mandatory step, it is between the relationship that the company has along with the customer. So based on that, you get your information passed on, right? Whatever is the information that needs to be passed on, it goes on, and then we plan for a go live. Go live is nothing but on to the customer's mission. So usually most of the time we might not be dealing with individual machines of the user. Okay, so we might give them the one server, which is the orchestrator installation, and we might just install it there. And from there, most of the companies, from there, if we give the document or we give a deployment guide, they take it from there to the, because they might be having, when you're running a process automation for a particular customer, they might be having somebody from their side who is aware of the automation. Okay, most of the companies now has an automation person who is aware of how to run process, how to actually if there's a process having a problem, or how to deploy it on multiple machines and things like that, multiple end users. Okay, so most of the time, especially when you're talking about any unattended thing, you're going to talk about only orchestrated deployment, which is goes into the company's server or the company's mission or something, and then we are going to talk about deployment into the end user's mission. So the go live will be planned, and then we have the control state. So the control state will be a monitoring of your what happened. So far we created the process automation in an environment which was a replica of the actual production environment, right? So now we have, since we have deployed it into our actual production data, you might be dealing with the actual production data that is coming in, or the actual live data that is actually coming in, and then we are going to monitor it. Is your process, the automation process that you did, is it working as in stake with the actual requirement that we have, or is there any issues, or is it hanging down anywhere, or is the data getting processed most of the times, right? So we might be there might be cases of like you put it in a phased manner, or you put it as one shot, you might put it as a go live, and all those things, that depends on what kind of project you are and stuff like that. And then we do all the metrics tracking, and finally after your post implementation support or during your post implementation support, even the number of errors that you receive during the support that you're giving for your product, even those will be calculated. So that only actually defines what was the intents of your project that you have done. Has it been working the same way, that what was the bettering that you have done, what was the what was the betterment you have done, have you increased the execution time, or have you decreased the execution time? All those things will be tracked, and then you have the post implementation support and your total metrics. And with this we'll close the project. There might be somebody called a bot controller from either from the customer side or from the from the actual development side, who will be monitoring the thing. If the company, if the customer requires somebody from the technical team to be available, we have shared resources who will be available. The role name might be the bot controller, who will be actually working on multiple processes, just controlling the process and monitoring the processes onto that customer's mission, or onto, if it is on the on the mission that we have access, then they might be accessing that particular mission. So this is what we have as an RPA life cycle. So any RPA tool that you're going to use, the same life cycle will be followed, and the same set of documents will be followed. You have an opportunity assessment, you have a process design or a definition document, you have a solution design document, then you have a PDI, which will be the instruction that says, okay, this is how I'll be clicking from this page, I'll go to this button, I'll go from this button to this page will open up. It is a kind of a navigation walkthrough, okay, for any kind of tool, a process design instruction. And then you have a software and a hardware requirement, assess and the proposed solution, a summary report. A summary report is the execution report that your bot has done for a particular execution. So suppose if you're doing a data processing, then it will say I did this many data processed, this many was an application exception, this many was a business exception, this many data processed through, this is the final result. So all the, for a particular execution, if it runs today, you'll have a summary report. If it runs tomorrow, another summary report. Then you have a unit test case and a UID tracker and a deployment guide, and finally a user guide as to if in case it involves end user, then how are we going to do it. Okay, this will be the overall picture. This is going to be very much important when you're going to talk about you're going for a job interview, or you have an interview asking what is your role and stuff like that. You're going to go ahead and talk about all these things irrespective of whatever is your role. You can talk about your PDD or your SDD. This is what you have updated, or this is what I have done. So this was the mail automation, we had this many issues, so we captured it in a defect management tracker, and all those things you will be able to capture, and I mean you will be able to talk about all those things, right? And then we also, okay, these are the roles and responsibilities. So who does what, right? So you have the process owner and the SME or the business analyst who will be documenting all those things, and then the developer will actually do all those things, and then we do our testing and deployment, and finally there'll be a testing sign off and a deployment onto production where the automation solution will be used by the end users, right? By now this one you are aware, right? We have a studio to actually work on the workflow. Then we have a bot which is inbuilt, which will be executing the workflow that you have designed. And then we have an orchestrator which will actually monitor and deploy the process and stuff like that, right? So this is something that we are already aware of. Okay, then we were talking about what are the available, the overview of the UiPath Studio, right? So when I say the overview of the studio, it is going to be, yeah. So when I say it is an overview of the studio, you have a lot of project templates. You have the basic flow is going to be a sequence and a flow chart, right? A sequence is going to be more linear, right? One box after another is going to be a sequence. Suppose you want to connect or make branching, or you want to make decisions, and we have something called a flow chart, right? So which will have decision making, which will have multiple branches. Okay, 1 second. So we are going to talk about a flowchart which will have multiple branching that will be available. So a flowchart sequence is going to be the smallest form of a project. A flowchart will be like you can do it for even larger projects. You will be able to use a flowchart. Okay, so which means you can go ahead and connect, or you can go ahead and see multiple branching that will be available. Then the next one is going to be a state machine. A state machine uses the concept where flowchart will not be able to connect to itself. A state machine, you will be able to connect to the same box again and again. In the state machine, we have a concept called state and a final state. Each state, which means from one box you can jump to any other box. That is what is a basic idea of state machine. Okay, so which means you are going to, on certain conditions, the similar statement as a go to statement. So you might be writing a piece of code and you'll say on this particular scenario go to this particular statement, right? So the similar thing you can achieve using a state machine. So we have on each state, okay, we have something called an entry, exit, and a transition. So which means on entry or into that particular box, what we are supposed to do. When we are moving out of that particular activity, what are we supposed to do? And on what condition am I going to move out of the box? That will be coming under the transition. So the robotic enterprise framework works on the state machine. So we are going to cover what is state machine when we are doing the robotic enterprise framework. And whenever you want to do error handling. So when you want to do an error handling, we are going to talk about the global exception handler. So a single project will be having one global exception, handler. Okay, so global exception handler will be just one particular file per project. So this will be actually define the project's behavior that is need to that the project need to behave when it encounters an error. So which means if there's an exception that occurs, then you're going to move the particular project, the flow will be moved, and going on to the control will go on to the global exception handler. From there it will say, okay, this particular error you can retry or you can go ahead. So instead of you writing it in the catch block, in the catch block you will be calling the global exception handler. Okay, From there the control will go on there, it will gather, or it will describe the project's behavior, and from there it will come back to the project, back again to the try section. Okay, so based on those particular things you can do. A global handler is going to be one single file which will work across all the projects, I mean all these XAML files. Okay, then we were talking about the different project templates. One is going to be the basic process template, which is the basic template. Okay, remember all the templates or all the project templates, however you define your project templates, everything is going to be deployed in the orchestrator only. So everything will be at one point will be converted to an orchestrator process template. Okay, so always, whether you have it as a trigger based automation or whether you have it as a process, it's going to move on to the orchestrator only at the end of the day, right? So don't confuse yourself. Can I have only, if it is an orchestration process template only, I need to deploy it in orchestrator. If it is a background process, then I will not have it in the orchestrator. No, it's not like that. Every project that you, every process automation that you do is going to be in the orchestrator only. Okay, and then we are going to say the simple process was a simple process automation that you are doing. And even if it is a simple process automation, you can drag and drop multiple flowcharts, multiple sequences, multiple XAML files, and all those things, and you can create a full-fledged, bigger, complex project also. End of the day, that also will go into the orchestrator for deployment, right? So what is the difference between each of the project? When you're dealing with a very high-level project, we will have, you will be designing the, or you will be deciding the what is your project template that you'll be working so on, right? So anything that you're going to work on, very detailed kind of a framework where you have multiple data processing, or the transactions are going to be there. So multiple data processing that you might be doing might fit under the robotic enterprise framework. Most of the projects now are into robotic enterprise framework only. But when you're understanding robotic enterprise framework, you will get to know it better. Okay, most of the data projects or most of the transaction based projects are going to be fitting under the robotic enterprise framework. And then we have an orchestration process. Orchestration process is nothing but the a process which is deployed on the orchestrator, so that it supports human intervention as well as unattended automation. Okay, so which is anything that, whether you want it as an user based operation project, or which is an attended automation or an unattended automation, long running transactions, can be deployed as an orchestration process template. So you can create a similar process that you're doing with the basic process template. The same thing you can do it in the orchestration process template also, and you can deploy it, whether it is unattended or an attended automation. Then we have something called a background process. A background process is basically going to be an unattended automation only. Okay, which means it runs at the background. So which means you're not going to have any user interaction. Okay, so when you don't have an user interaction, then it is going to be running at the background where the user might not be aware of. So those kind of processes only we call it as a background process. So which means you're not going to have any activity which deals with user interaction. No message boxes, no error handling has to be perfect, so that no error handling is displayed as a pop-up box to the customer or to the end user. So those kind of processes, we have it as a background process. And then we have a transactional process. A transactional process is similar to an orchestration process, but it is going to have more kind of transactions. It will be based on a flowchart methodology. Okay, even a simple process can be worked as a transactional process. If you click and drag a flowchart inside a process, then it is going to become a transactional process. Okay, this is also a basic automation process that we have, right? And then we have a trigger based automation. A trigger based automation is something which will be different from the other project templates, right? So a trigger based automation is nothing but you have a trigger, which means it is going to be an attended automation. So it is an attended automation where the user has to have a interaction with the project or with the process automation. So a trigger based automation is going to have certain triggers, like you have mouse click, you have an application trigger and you have a non-application trigger. So let's talk about, now that we are aware about user interfaces and everything, so you have a user interface trigger and you have a non-user interface trigger. Okay, a user interface trigger is categorized into, you have an application which is open, that is your user interface. So anywhere in your application, when you're going to have a mouse click or a keyboard that you press, okay, anywhere in this particular corner of the application, on the top right corner of the application, I go and do double clicks. So that is a mouse click event on the application. So similarly, you have a keyboard event on that particular application. Okay, you have the application open, you have the user interface open, and you're going to do a keyboard press. So at that time, you're going to have the application, the trigger happening. Okay, so a certain set of operations will be working. Sorry. So this is based on the user interface. Then the next trigger, the third trigger that we have is a general trigger, which is not based on the user interface, which means if you have your system opened anywhere, you press a control K or a control enter or a shift enter or whatever keyboard that you actions that you do, if you set it, there will be a set of events that will be done. So this is an important interview question that we ask. So what is what kind of activities you can perform in a trigger based automation? Okay, so basic one will be user interface based. So inside the user interface, if you do a mouse action or a keyboard action, okay, and outside the user interface, so where you do not have an user interface, even if you have any application open, you do that particular operation, which is a keyboard event only. So you do that particular operation, then at that time your events are going to be triggered, or your corresponding actions are going to be triggered. So most of the times you can use a trigger based automation when you have certain files, or when you say, okay, I am going to run ad hoc processes. When I receive a particular email, I am going to trigger a trigger based. I can press a keyboard trigger and I'll say, okay, run this particular set of automation. So that particular bot will be looking at the email that you got, and then it will start. So rather than you creating a process automation, which will, you have to start every time, anybody who is using that particular system will be able to start the trigger based automation. So these kind of scenarios you go. Mostly trigger based automation is not a widely used one. The other templates, yes, most of the time we'll be using the robotic enterprise framework only. So the robotic enterprise framework is a template where you're going to have, it is a much easier template, which is going to be which is developed or which is formed to help the developers. So just for the ease of working for the developers, and so that you follow a proper methodology of writing your code or writing your flowchart. That is why we have the robotic enterprise framework. So the robotic enterprise framework will actually list you, okay, this is your first set of actions that you need to do. After this, in your project, compulsorily you have to do these set of operations. And then the third thing will be another set of compulsorily operations. And then you'll go for transaction processing, and then you'll go and end the process. So you will have an order in which you will be executing your code. Okay, so that any order fails, you will be seeing that, okay, this particular area we have got a fail, so probably this is the exception that it has occurred. So you go and log the exception, or you go and handle that particular exception, right? So this particular framework allows all the best practices for the developer. So which means your logging mechanisms, your retry mechanisms, how do you actually log into an application, how do you actually log out into an application, how do you close all your sessions. So sometimes we might just be opening and we might not log out itself, so you have to go and log out of the application, right? So those kind of scenarios you have to mandatorily do in this particular framework. Even if there is a chance that you might be missing in all the things because you do not have a framework decided, right? Here it will not be the case. You have the framework, so there is no chance that you will be missing, because the framework will not work. If you don't log out, the entire project will not work. So you have to go and mandatorily light your log out functionality. Okay, so that is how you will be that is how the framework is designed. We are going to see more in the coming classes, so you will be able to understand, right? And then we saw what was variables, right? The basic programming information. So whenever you're going to have data processing, or whenever you're going to have information coming and going out of your program, you're going to hold it inside of the box and you're going to use that. Only if the name of the box is available, you will be able to go and refer the data. If you don't have the box available, then the data cannot be referred. The data will be lost. So this is what we call it as variables. Variables are the boxes which is going to hold the data, right? So we have different kinds of information that we are going to hold. You could hold text information, which is the basic names, numbers, special characters, and all those things. You can hold it in a box called string. Then we have integer, which is going to be all the number information. Then we have boolean, which is going to be true or false information. Then we have array, list, and dictionary. These are all collection objects. Array is going to be list of array is going to be the same set of instead of holding just one data, you'll have multiple values of the same data. You go inside the library, you take 10 books, under your name 10 books will be written. This is a concept of array. Okay, so always remember that where you can use an array, whenever you have limited set of data, you can go and use the array. When you know that you're going to deal with only 10 information, then you go ahead and deal with arrays. So suppose you do not know what is the set of information or what is the count of the information that you're going to have, then you use the concept of list. The difference between array and list, again, a very important question in terms of certification and in terms of interviews. What is the difference between an array and a list? When you do not know the count of the information, or when you need to modify the content of the information, then you're going to have lists, right? So arrays and list almost are the same. It could be array of string, list of list of integer, list of booleans, or array of boolean. It could be any kind of information, right? So when we are dealing with, most of the time, if you remember in the mail automation, we said list of emails, list of mail messages, right? Because we do not know what is the content of the email, or we do not know what what we will be doing with the mail. You might be modifying the content of the email and things like that. There, on those kind of scenarios, you're not going to use arrays. So we are going to use a list only. Okay, so anywhere when you're dealing with smaller amount of data, you use arrays. When you're dealing with bigger amount of data which needs to be modified or which needs to be worked on, then you're going to use list. So which means if you're modifying any physical folders, okay, then you're going to have list of folders. If you're modifying emails, then you're going to have list of mail messages. If you're doing any kind of automation where you're going to capture all the information from multiple Excel sheets, then you're going to have list of Excel sheets, right? So these are the different information that you will be capturing in terms of list. Then we have dictionary. Dictionary we'll anyway cover. Dictionary is an object where you're going to load pairs of values, right? And then we have another information called date and time. Date and time is simply going to have date and time information. So you can have it in the whatever format that you have, whether you want it as a month first, date second, and the year. So you can rechange the order in the way that you require. Then we have the data table. So data table is going to be when you have bigger pieces of data, right? So when you have bigger chunks of data and you're going to talk about rows and columns, then you have two-dimensional data that is available. So anything which is in the format of an Excel sheet, which is in the format of a table in the web page, which is in the format of a data grid in the web page, which is in the form of a database table, any MS Access tables, all those things are going to be in the format of data table. So blindly you can just convert that into a data table and you can start processing your data. Okay, so that will be the data table information. Then to do the conversions, right? So always we have conversions that we need to do. So you add a .to string if you want to convert it into a string information. You add a cint of if you want to convert it into an integer information. Then you had a c date of a prefix. You had a prefix of c date if you want to convert it into a date information, right? So you're going to have c date of the variable name. So which means that particular variable name will be converted into a date format. So these kind of conversions also you can do. So you define in the variable panel. Suppose you define it as a string and you're storing a date information. You can convert this into a date format. Wherever you need to make comparisons or wherever you need to make some date functionality operations, you can convert at that particular scenario, you can convert it into a C date of and then do the particular operation, and then your box will still be of the string type only. You can also do a multiple processing after conversion. Once you convert it, you can put it into a different variable and store it, or you can use it inside your application or during processing, and then you can, just leave it. So there are scenarios where you might be individually required to convert the variable types, right? So these kind of conversions are still explicitly allowed in UiPath. But suppose your project involves too much of conversion, like you do not know what kind of information is going to come in. So the safety factor, what they did was a proprietary variable was defined, which is the generic value variable, which is proprietary only to UiPath. So it cannot be used elsewhere. This is a UiPath owned variable type. Okay, so the generic value variable is going to be something where automatic conversions happen. So you can convert from one kind of data to any kind of data. So even if you store it as a string and you want to do an integer operation, you will be able to do it on that particular automatically. Okay, so that is the generic value. And then we have another proprietary variable, which is the Q item. These two are only the proprietary variables. Other variables will, if you need to refer Microsoft .NET and you can, and you're working on some complex projects which requires .NET, then you can use the same .NET concepts, .NET variables, and you can go ahead. Okay, but that may not be required. But usually these set of variables will be allowed. The final proprietary variable is going to be the Q item. So the Q item variable is going to be used whenever you're going to use orchestrator queues. Okay, with that we are going to cover when we are doing orchestrator. Okay, another important certification or an interview question. What is the conversion? Usually we will have this at least one question in the certification. So what will be the conversion? So if you're converting from an integer to a string format, then it will do the addition. Okay, the same thing if you're going to have a string format first, double quotes, followed by a concatenation symbol and a 10, it is going to do a concatenation. That is what it does. Okay, a generic value, always you need to make sure what kind of information you're passing. Based on the base information only, the operation will be performed. Not only for generic value, even in a message box, if you type, if you have a string information followed by something, it will do the concatenation operation only. So if you want to write something, it will ask for sure, it will ask the double quotes value that needs to be specified. Okay, so that is the overall picture of the variables and stuff like that. So the variable panel is something you are already aware by now. What we do in the variable panel, you have the variable name, the type, and the scope where your variable is going to be used. Precisely, you have to define it based on your project requirement. This will be identified when you're doing the SDD document itself. Most of the time, your variables and your names and what, because you will be following a certain naming convention and all those things will be defined. So these are the number of variables, these are the number of exceptions that we'll be creating, these are the invalid scenarios. So everything will be identified in your SDD document itself, and you can just follow that particular information. So there you will be identifying until where this particular variable needs to be available. Do I need it for the entire login functionality or for the entire application to be running? So everything you will define. And then we have a default field. A default is the basic field which will have, in case you have a default value that the particular variable need to hold. Okay, this is an optional field. Mandatorily you are not supposed to give this particular thing. You can, for this only we have the option of, instead of you writing in the default only, we bring it from outside the project, we bring it from the configuration file. Okay, but it is no harm if you are having some counters that you want to do, if you are doing some retry mechanism, if you initiate the value with 0, so those kind of information you can still go and give it in the variable panel. Okay, that should also work. Or the ideal way is bring it from the configuration file. Most of the variables that you feel that might be changing, bring it from the configuration file. Okay, then we had something called the control flow. Control flow are the activities which is going to control the flow of the operation. So repetitive actions, if you want to say, you want to go ahead and do some equations, if you want to assign a particular counter, so those kind of operations only which will control the flow of the flow of the execution is called the control flow activities. So you have an assign activity which is going to be assigning certain information to another information. So it could be equations, it could be simple numbers, or it could be adding numbers, or it could be anything that you want to assign, right? So you can use an assign statement. And then you have condition checking, which is if and a flow decision. If is going to be the basic understanding between an if and a flow decision is, make sure that you precisely define your, it's going to be visually appealing when you're using a flow decision. Both has two choices only, if true, if false. So it is if then else, right? So similar to a flow decision also, you will be having if flow decision true and a false. But the only point where we go ahead and use a flow decision is, say suppose you are doing in the if section, you're writing a piece of code for the then, okay, or in the else block you're writing a piece of code. If in the else block at the certain step, suppose you're writing 10 steps, and in the 8th step or in the 10th step you want to connect back to the box before the if, means you won't be able to do. So it is a sequence only which will be written inside the if statement. I hope you're understanding. People might not be aware what is the definition, what is the difference between a flow decision and an if. So in case you're going to write, So in case you have two things, say here you're having two boxes. Inside these two boxes, from here if I want to connect to the from here if I want to connect to the second step, I won't be able to connect. From here if I want to connect to the second step, inside this if else section I won't be able to connect, because if you see this is a sequence, you won't be able to connect. Automatically if you drag more activities, a sequence will be created. This is not just for if, it is going to be working in the same way for switch also. Okay, so everywhere you create, the cases in the switch will be the similar to a sequence only. So a sequence is more linear, so you won't be able to perform multiple connecting to the previous box. But in case you are going to use a flow decision, then you are going to have the same thing. In case you are going to have a flow decision, on the false side, you will still be able to go ahead and connect. So this is the basic understanding of where you need to use a flow decision and where you need to use a if statement. If is going to be used when you don't have, when you have very simple operations. So here after this, if you want to connect back to the first step, then you're going to connect back it here. Okay, this you won't be able to allow to, this you won't be able to or you're not allowed to do it in the if basic if operation. So your if is going to be the either it is a then section or an else section is going to be more linear. Okay, but here in a flow decision you will have the same condition, you can still go ahead. So precisely same thing will be working for your switch and a flow switch as well. Okay, so you have to precisely define whether you have options to reconnect elsewhere, or you are making conditions that you need to jump from one thing to another. Okay, at that time you're going to have a flow decision or a flow switch. This is a basic difference between a flow decision and a flow switch, between an if and a switch, a normal switch, right? So a flow decision and if is going to perform the same set of operations, two choices, and if the choice is true, if the choice is not true, so you make sure the condition is met, and accordingly your program will be branching across two things. Similarly, you have a switch and a flow switch. So when you have multiple cases, when you have multiple choices, okay, if you have three choices, you can stick to one flow decision with a flow decision inside a flow decision. So you can have another flow decision here and then capture it. So you can also do like that, which is a nested if. Okay, or you can prefer a flow switch or a switch which will have multiple information going across different branches. So you have multiple options, right? And then we have the looping methodology. So the looping methodology is going to be used whenever you're going to have repetitive actions. So when you want to process the same data again, or when you want to process or repetitively perform same actions again. So those type of scenarios, you're going to have a looping methodology. If you are receiving mails, 10 emails, and you want to loop through all the 10 emails, then you're going to use the looping methodology. If you're going to have a couple of file folders, then you want to say you're searching for a particular file inside it. You want the file which is going to be with this particular name only. So what you'll do, you'll go for the first thing, see whether it has that particular name. Second file, see whether that it has a particular name. Third file, yes, the third file has. So probably you're searching for the file name one by one, right? So this is where we'll be using the looping methodology, where the same action is repeated multiple number of times. So those kind of scenarios where you're going to use the looping methodology. So based on the kind of action that you're going to perform, whether you want to do it irrespectively for all the data, or for all the files, or for all the information, okay, then you're going to use a for each. Okay, whether it is going to be data processing or a file processing or a mail processing, if you're going to do it for all the files, for all the data, for all the information, then you're going to use a for each, which means it will scan the entire data together and it will do. Okay, if it performs for the first data, it will perform for the last data also the same way, right? But if you want to perform sorry, but if you want to perform for a limited set of actions, say it's a limited set of files, so if you want to perform only from the third file to the 10th file, or the third data to the 10th data, then you're going to have a while or a do while. Okay, so this condition you always need to remember when you're supposed to introduce a while or a do while, and when you're supposed to introduce for each, right? So which means when you have for, it is going to be for all data. If you want to scan through all data, if you want to scan through all files, every time you're going to use for each. So for each, again you have two operations, for each data table, for each control. Anything specific to data table data, then you're going to have explicitly data table for each row in data table. Okay, so which means it will take the first row, which will be the active row, then the second row, which will be the active row. So it will have only one row active at a time. When you use for each, only one row will be active at a time. Okay, then you're going to have for each control. So anything other than data table, then you're going to have a for each control. So here you have to specify what kind of data you are processing. So this is going to be type argument is going to be available in the properties field, where you go and say, okay, I'm processing file folders, I'm processing mail messages. So when we were doing actually the mail automation, we were saying we are processing a for each control for mail messages, and we went and selected type argument system.net.mail.mail messages, right? So that particular thing you have to give whenever you're doing other than a data table. You need to, because this is a generic for each control, you need to say to UiPath Studio what exactly data, what kind of data you're going to process in the for each. So that is why we have a type argument here. So similarly, the type argument is going to be available in the switch. What type of data you're going to pass through the switch, what type of information you're going to pass through the switch, right? So you have a for each control, right? And similarly, you're going to have a while and a do while. While will be used for a specified part of your automation. Here also a specified part of your automation that you want to repeatedly process. Okay, this is for all the data. This is going to be for specified information that you want to process. The difference is going to be while is going to have the condition first and then execute the iteration. Okay, so if you say process information between row count 1000 to 1000 to 2000, then that will be the condition, and only if that condition is satisfied, it will go and loop through that particular information. A do while is going to be, if you say process the information from 1001 to 2000, even whether the condition is met or not, it will process at least once, because in the do while the body is going to be first and then the condition will be. In the while, the condition will be first and then you want to have a body. When you can use a do while, you can use a do while whenever you want to perform any kind of operation, whether the condition is successful or not, you want to perform it once. Okay, if you're searching for file folders, whether the thing is there or not, you might be going and marking, yes, this particular is executing log file, track the log file. You might be saying, I'm executing this particular thing at least once time, and you will be writing it into a log, this particular execution happened. So those particular scenarios, you can go ahead and say a do while loop. So irrespective of whether the condition needs to be met or not, you want to execute the condition once. You want to execute the operation once. At that time, you go ahead and do while. When you have a while, you're just going to go and only if the condition is satisfied, it will go inside the iterating action. Otherwise, it will not do an iteration at all. This will do at least once. Okay, then we have something called a break. A break is going to be, can be used only inside the for each activity, similar to a do while. When based on a condition you want to come out of the loop, then you can have a break statement and you can put it. So you can also check it as the first time you want to run and you want to put a break, it will run the first time, it will do a break and it will come out. So usually you can also define it as inside a for each, you can put it as when the data comes like this. So you can put an if statement, and in the true section you can put a break and it will just come outside the thing. Okay, so those type of scenarios you will be allowed. Usually a break is going to be inside the for each only. So you put a for each and a break, it will just come out of that particular scenario, or come out of that particular for loop. Okay, so this is one the control flow loops. Then we actually went into Excel automation, right? So Excel automation again is going to be very, very important part of processing when you're dealing with a lot of data processing. So when you have data, most of the projects that might be coming will be manual intervention where they do a lot of data processing. So you need to convert it into an Excel automation. Either you generate it in a report format, or you get it in the Excel format and you want to do some data entries. Okay, so those kind of all scenarios, you can do it. Appraisal process, sales process, any kind of reporting that you want to do, or any kind of data collection that you want to do, all those things will be coming in the format of Excel. Okay, so you have two options, even a CSV data, which is an unstructured format, right? So it is not in the CSV format is a comma separated value format, right? It is not in terms of for rows and columns, even that format you will be able to convert it into a data table. Okay, so how you will do it is, you can, there is an option called generate data table. Even the unstructured data will be converted into a generate data table, which will be converted into a data table structured format. So you can also use it for CSV files. Okay, so any unstructured data also you can go ahead and use it into a data table. So any structured data that you have, any bigger pieces of information, then you're going to have data table. So some of the operations that you will be able to do it with the data table. You can create your own data table. You can add values inside your own data table. You can add data columns. You can add data rows. Okay, you can club two data tables, which is merge data table. You can take the data based on certain conditions between two data tables. That is going to be joining data tables. Okay, so in case you want to just filter a particular data table, you can use a filtering method. Another important question in terms of interviews and in terms of certifications, what is the alternate method of using the filter wizard? So without using the filter wizard, how can you actually filter on a particular column? Say suppose you have a column called employee ID and some other value experience. If you want to filter based on employee ID column and which is equal to this particular value or 1001, if I want to filter based on that particular employee ID 1 and the experience, okay, I should still be able to do it. So how will I do it? You have the select option. I'll give you the syntax. So you have the select option. Okay. So usually it will be the data table dot select of the column name and the value, and you put an and or an or condition, and then again you can put the column name and the value. I'll give you the syntax. Okay. So this is another alternate method. Okay, so this particular alternate method also could be used whenever you're not using the filter method. Usually we go in for this particular thing and we bring it from the configuration file. Okay, so that the conditions will never be even if the conditions need to be modified at any time, you can go and modify it if in case you need to get it from the configuration file. Otherwise you can just code it inside your program and you can just put a select and the column names. Right, so this is alternate method of a filter wizard. So you can similarly, you can check between duplicate rows, you can add or remove data columns, you can add or remove data rows. Okay, so anywhere when you're processing Excel, we always process row wise only. So that is why we also do a row wise operation only with the for each row here. Okay, 90% of the project we will be doing row wise operation only. We won't be doing a column wise operation, right? So those kind of scenarios only we achieve it through a for each row inside a data table. So you have a filter method, you have a sort data table, remove duplicate rows and join data table. So based on the data that is available between 2 or 3 tables, you can between 2 tables, you can go ahead and join. So you have an inner join, outer join and a full join. So those particular actions will be done, right? Then we have something called a, when we are doing Excel automation. So we had two different varieties of Excel, right? So Excel activities are going to be inside the package called UiPath.excel.activities. Right. So you have Excel activities, which will be under app integration. And next we have the system file workbook.activities. So what are the differences? I've defined it to you. So one is going to be like more specific when the application is available. Excel application is installed in your system, in your working system, right? And the other one is when Excel is not installed. So which means when Excel is installed, you will be allowed to use the more complex operations inside Excel, like doing graphical representations. All those things you will be allowed to use when you're using system.workbook operations. It will be the basic operations which will be working based on the plugin that is already installed in your system. You may not have an Excel, but it might be talking in terms of Microsoft plugins that might be there. Okay, so anywhere that you do not have, so when you're doing a basic operation on the Excel, like you're reading and then you're doing simple operations like data table processing, and then you want to update, then go ahead and use a workbook.read range or workbook.activities. If you're doing complex operations, right, then you can go ahead and write it inside the Excel application scope. So usually another difference is if you write, another difference between an Excel operation is always you need to write your code inside an Excel application. Say suppose you're going to write it here. Okay, always you need to write. If you're doing in your Excel application scope, if you're writing anything, whatever you're going to perform inside the Excel, which means a read range, a for each data table, a write range, append range, filter data table, whatever you're going to do needs to be inside, only inside the do block. If you come outside of this and you write, your piece of code will not work. Okay, this is, you can take it as an advantage or you can take it as a disadvantage also. Okay, so always you need to write information. So here also we have it as a sequence, so you won't be able to connect back to any other previous information. Okay, so that may be a drawback at certain scenarios, right? For that only we just simply use a workbook.read range and we simply go ahead. Okay, so that is why here when you see this particular read range, the excel.read range will not have the file information, because you're writing always this inside the opened file only. So that is why you don't have this read range or write range or append range. Nowhere you'll have the file name. It will just have the sheet name alone. So you'll be directly, since you need to write it only inside the do block, assuming the page is already, or the workbook is already open. That is why they have given a coding like this. So always you're supposed to use it inside the Excel application scope. You cannot touch base and connect it to the previous blocks or previous activities. So that is, you can take it as a drawback, but most of the scenarios you might not be involved in a condition like that. Okay, so the other read range that you're going to do is, you're going to see the, because you're not using the Excel application scope, it is a direct workbook.read range. That is why you would be seeing the information of what is the workbook name and then the sheet name. Okay, so that is a major difference between using integration, app integration Excel activities and a workbook, system workbook dot activities. Okay, so the basic difference is, you need to put all your code inside the Excel application scope only, because here anything will not have the workbook name, because you have already, it is assumed that you have already specified that in the Excel application scope, right? So this is the information. Then there are other differences also that you will be doing based on whatever whether it is a password protected. You can have the Excel application scope, the sheet might still be open for you, it will not throw an error. Here it will throw an error. So all that differences I have already explained. You can verify the information that I have already explained, right? So back to our Excel automation. So what actually happens, what kind of data that you're going to have? So anything that you're having as a data that is inside the Excel always needs to be converted into a data table. And from the data table only, you're going to do all the processing. Why you need to do it from the data table? It's going to be more faster. So the moment you do load it into the data table and you're having it inside the memory, it's going to be more faster for you to do a lot of processing. Whether, yeah, I mean, when compared to you connecting to the Excel, taking the values and then doing the processing there, every time the focus shift will be there. From here, it will be shifting to Excel, do some processing, then again it will shift to UiPath Studio. So there are too many focus shifts, right? So these kind of operations can cause a memory leakage. So for those reasons only, we try to load the entire data table, do all the processing in the data table, and then finally you do the updated data into an Excel sheet. So there are two ways of update. You can write the updated information. If there's a requirement that you need to take the data from the Excel and update it back based on certain processing, you can update the data directly into an Excel. Or if you have too much of data that you need to update, then you update into the data table and copy the entire data table into the Excel sheet. So override the Excel sheet with the updated data. So it depends on your project requirement, how you want to do. So both the ways, there are advantages, there are disadvantages. However, you have to wisely choose between what is your data, what is your kind of requirement is, and accordingly you do your writing or you do your processing. Okay, the general method, if you're just working on certain columns, then you can do direct Excel update. If you're working on multiple data and you want to do multiple updates, and do a data table, full data table update. So you're going to do a write range and you will, or an append range, and you will directly come and override the existing data. Okay, so that particular information you can do, right? Sorry. So now coming back to your data, right? So you have couple of ways that you can process your data. So when you know the information, the location of your information, or sorry, when you do not know the location of your information, right? So you're going to scan the entire data, which means search the entire data, and then only you need to identify, right? So those kind of information you can go ahead and you can use a for each row, which means you need to scan through the data and fetch the values. Okay, when you know the location of the data, you use the direct row index and the column index information. So you can simply say data table dot rows of row index and the column index. It will directly give you. Why you cannot use a row index and a column inside here? Because you just have one active row. So in case this has 10 rows, the data table has 10 rows. If you want to fetch the ninth row, the first column, the data table structure itself will be of 10 rows, so you can directly go and fetch it. But inside the for each row, you only have the one single row, so it is always row of 0. You cannot, even the ninth row will be appearing as the row of 0 only. So you cannot use the row index and the column index methodology here. Okay, so it is not that you cannot use, it is not the best practice. It will still allow you to use, okay, but it is not the best practice that you're supposed to use, because you already have the data table open and you already have one data table row only. So you need not go and specify the row index and the column index. By default itself you have only 0th row index, and the column index only will be changing, so that you can take it as the row of one or row of the column name, and you can go ahead. So that is the difference, right? And one another thing that is there is get row item. Okay, maybe we might have not used it in the examples. There is something called a get row item. So in your data table operations, you have a get row item. So for example, get row item is something that you can use it only inside a for each row. Okay. So suppose you are using a for each row, and inside the for each row, which means you have one active row. Okay. Say suppose the first row is there. So if you say get row item, okay, it will do the same information as you're doing an assign operation. So what you need to give is, you need to give the data table row. So if you have the row, if you're going to have the particular, say if you want to take the column, that particular thing, the employee name or the vendor tax ID is in the second column, you can give that particular column name, and you, or the index or the column name, and you can go ahead and get the fetched value. This will, instead of you using an assign, and you will be putting, right, assign str first name is equal to row of, you will be writing, right, row of name dot to string. You might be writing it like this, right? So instead of this, you can simply specify the row of name. So name will be the column name. So you can simply go and specify the name information, and you can create an output called str first name. It will automatically do that. Okay, so it will automatically get that particular item which is under the column called row of name. So you can use this also. This is an alternate method. Okay, in if you don't want to create, here also you create variable, here also you create variable. However is a method, you can go ahead and use that particular method. Okay, so get row item. Yeah, then we saw examples of Excel. So we saw most of the time 90% of your projects will be coming in these kind of scenarios only, where you're involved with doing data processing. So you know the location of the data, and you don't know the location of the data. So when you say you just want to repeat the certain actions. So irrespective of the location, you want to repeat the same set of actions for all the data, then you're going to use a for each. So what we did, we concatenated. So the concatenation was something that we are repeating for all the data. So we copied this, and then we concatenated. We copy this, and concatenate. Copy this, and concatenate. Right? So here what we are doing, a repetitive action is performed, where this repetitive action is performed as an iterative action. So you keep this, instead of writing it for 10 times, you are putting it inside a for each loop, and you're just writing it as a looping operation. So it will take this information, write it here. Take this, write it here. So the iterative action is performed again and again for all the rows. This was one set of data where you are just performing iterative action or repetitive action for all the data. The next kind of data that we actually saw was a nested information where you have multiple sheets and you're going to compare the data. Here also you do not know where the data is. So which means you're taking this particular data and you're searching it here. You're taking this particular data and you're searching it here, right? That was the example we saw. So you do not know the exact location of your data. So those kind of scenarios, again, you're going to search or scan the data. For all data only you're going to do the searching, right? So at that time also you have to use a for each. Now when you're talking about multiple workbooks or multiple worksheets, then you're going to have how many number of sheets you have, that many number of for eaches you're going to talk. Okay, again here the catch is you do not know the location of the data and you're going to scan across all the data, whether it is one sheet or multiple sheet. If you have one sheet, put a one for each. If you have multiple sheets, put multiple for eaches. So how your program will be working? This will be your base sheet, which will be the master sheet, which you're going to compare. So this will be one for each. So inside this, you're going to compare here. So inside this, you're going to put a for each for this. And in case you're comparing it like from here to here also, you're going to put for each 3 inside the for each one. That is what we might have done. So you did a sheet 1 for each, a sheet 2 for each, and then the sheet 1 under sheet 1 only you are doing a sheet 3 for each. So based on what kind of operation, suppose you are going to compare this with this and then this with this, then you're going to have for each, then for each 2 which will be inside for each 1, and then you're going to have for each 3 which will be inside for each 2. Okay, so based on whatever kind of logic you are going to have, that many for eaches you are going to have, right? So here you do not know the location of the data and you're just going to scan across all the data and you're going to search. Those kind of scenarios you're going to have for each. And when you want to write back to the information, you're going to have a write range or write cell basically. Then you're going to, if you're going to have write cell, then you're going to have something called Excel counter. So you will be defining the Excel counter. So if you want to write it in C2, then your end Excel counter is equal to 2. So you when you are finishing your for each, okay, always before for each you write this increment. Okay, so that you will not forget. So when you're writing it to say write cell in C2, right? So you say write cell in C2, whatever is your full name. Then what you're going to do before you finish it, you're going to increment the Excel counter is equal to int Excel counter plus 1. So from 2, it will change to 3. Okay, so like this every time it will be incrementing and finally it will come out. So the writing also will happen in an incremented manner. Okay, so if your writing is not happening in an incremented manner, then you're going to go ahead and increment the Excel counter just before the end of for each so that it will work perfectly. Okay, now this is when you have just one sheet, your incrementing is going to be fine. Okay, but when you have multiple sheets, okay, I have not written that. Okay. So when you have multiple sheets, what is going to happen is your increment counter will just be, so how many times it will be comparing? 1 will be compared with 4, 2 will be compared with 4, 3 will be compared with 4, 4 will be compared with 4. So which means you are incrementing it 4 into 4. So it is 16 times you are going to increment, right? But if you see, you are going to write back only in the 4 columns that you are having or 4 information that you are having. So always you increment it, and again when you come out of the for each, you are going to change it back to the actual value. So you will reinitialize the value. So when you're dealing with multiple worksheets and you're just having a limited set of data, your row count will be just incrementing as such when you're doing the comparison. Okay, I'm not sure if you're remembering. So what will happen is this will be coming as row 1, Mridul with Asha row 2 or int Excel 2. Then this will be int Excel 3, then int Excel 4. Now this will be Asha with Ramesh will be int Excel 5, which means it will be writing the data as C5. That is not supposed to happen. So then it will be C6, then it will be C7, then it will be C8. No, it is not that way that we are supposed to do. So what we'll do, when it does the first time done itself, we are going to reinitialize back to 2. So what we do, we reinitialize it back to 2 and we are going to say when it comes to Asha, then again it will start from C2, C3, C4, C5. Aparna again C2, C3, C4, C5. So whenever you're handling with multiple Excel sheets, you have to reinitiate. Otherwise it will be writing at the wrong indexes, right? So that way you have to go ahead and write it in a different in the same location. So you can reinitialize. So when you do not know the content of the data or the location of the data, and you want to scan across all the data and you want to iterate operations, then you go ahead and use the for each loop. Okay. Now when you know the location of the data, right? So this was the second operation I said. So you go ahead and say sheet 1. So suppose sheet 1 you're comparing with sheet 2, then you go and write a for each for sheet 1, a for each for sheet 2. This one you want to compare with sheet 3, then you put a for each inside the sheet 2. Okay. So you put a for each inside the sheet 2. So this is also, so based on whatever is your requirement, you can go ahead and write. Now the third thing is the method one, where you know the location of the data. Whenever you want to compare a master data sheet and a different data sheet. So whenever you want to do sheet comparisons, when you have a mobile number updated or not, address updated or not, you might be checking, right? So based on the checking on the comparisons, you might be going and updating the information. So those kind of scenarios, what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and compare the same column number with a different column. Okay, maybe the content of the column will be different, but the indexes might be the known indexes, which means you might be comparing 10 with 70. You might be comparing 20 with 55. You might be comparing 10 with some other value here. So which means this index also is known, this index is also known. So those times you are going to use this simply directly the row index information. So you go ahead and say give the data table dot rows of row index and the column number indexes. So when you use this, you cannot use a for each, right? By default, if you use this particular method, if you use this particular method, then you cannot use a for each. A for each can be used only without this particular method. So don't always remember this concept. You cannot use this method. Best practices, you cannot use this method inside a for each. So which means if you have this particular operation, then you have to trigger your own loop. So when I have to trigger my own loop, I will be putting a while loop and say, if it is a row count information, if you want to say, I want to perform this particular operation between these rows only. So you can give the row count information. If you want to say between row count is equal to 1000 and 2000, then that also you can define it as a condition. Okay. So when you know the content or the location of the data, and you're going to do it for a specific set of data. So if you want to do it only for these three information, then you can say while loop in row count between this and this. You can specify it here. Okay. And you can also do an automatic row count. So this is what we saw with the Excel information. So most of the Excels will be falling under these criteria only. Whether you know the location of the data and you do not know the location of the data. Wisely, you just go ahead and do the operations.